everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley, and today I'm going to be tier ranking all the horror books that I read last year. So I have previously done this same video with all of the thriller books that I read last year, so you can make sure that you go check out that video if you're interested in that as well. But today I'm going to be talking about all of the horror books that I read and tier ranking them in different tiers. I read nearly 30 horror books last year, and I talk about the favorites, I talk about the least favorites, but I don't always talk about the ones in the middle. So I wanted to do a full review of all of the horror books that I read last year and figure out how they stack rank in my different tiers. So here are all the tiers that we're going to be looking at today. The top one is easily explained. It is my all-time favorites. These are the ones that will really stick with me and that are horror books that I will want to return to and that I will remember for years to come. The next tier is It Delivered, and this is a horror book that did what it set out to do. It did what it said it was going to do. It was fine, but it's not an all-time favorite of mine. I had a good time with it, but it's not something that really blew me away. The next tier is Sorry to This Book, and these are books that I don't really remember. And I'm sorry to these books, but it just feels like I almost didn't even read you with how much I cannot remember you. The next tier is Not For Me. These are just horror books that were not for me for one reason or another. And then the final row is Immediately No. And these are the horror books that I just think were not good. And I just finished and said immediately no. So in no particular order, let's hop on into the books. Okay, so first up we have Blanky by Keenan Patrick Burke. And this one is gonna be a sorry to this book because I hardly even remember the author's name off the top of my head, and I really don't remember much about the book. It really didn't make much of an impact on me. As soon as I finished, I was like, yeah, this is fine, but it wasn't the best thing I've read. It wasn't the worst thing I've read. It was just kind of fine. Next up is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, and this one I actually ended up DNFing halfway through because I just wasn't ready to read it at the time. I wasn't in the mood for it. But the only person whose fault that is my own. It is not the book's fault. It's not the way it was advertised. I was just not in the mood for it. So I'm gonna say It Delivered. It was great when I was reading it. I just wasn't ready to really finish it. Next up is Nothing But Blackened Teeth. And this is a tough one. I'm gonna have to say It Delivered. I know so many people don't like this. The only other person that I've heard like this book is Riley Marie. I don't think I've heard anyone else actually enjoy this, but I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a fun time and I liked it, but a lot of other people didn't think it was very well done. Next up is My Heart Is a Chainsaw, and this one is immediately no for me. I DNF'd this one after like 60 pages because it was just a lot. You spend a lot of time in the main character's head and it's a weird place to be, and that just was not working for me. Next up is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, and this one I think I'm gonna say is not for me. I really thought this was gonna be a 5-star book when I started it because the beginning is so quirky and interesting, but when the horror element started coming into play, I didn't really like it. I didn't like the pacing of it. I didn't like the whole portal world execution, really. It just wasn't really what I was expecting. Next up is House of Holo, and this one is an all-time favorite for me. This is a YA horror book that I think I gave a 4-star when I read it, but the more time that passed after I read it, the more I liked it, thinking about it and just how cool and creepy it was. It's about these 3 sisters, and they all went missing when they were kids, and they came back very different, and now they're all grown up, and the oldest sister has now gone missing, and so the other 2 sisters team up to try to figure out what's going on, and it was just really good. I really liked it. Next up is A Dowry of Blood, which so many people have gushed about in the past year, but for me, I'm just gonna say It Delivered. I thought it was really well done. I thought it was written really well. It was a beautiful book, but it didn't blow me away like it blew away so many other people. I think it just did what it set out to do. It was a 4-star for me. I had a good time, but it's not personally an all-time favorite of mine. Next up is The Visitor by Sergio Gomez, which I just read in December, and this one is not for me. I wanted to spend more time caring about the characters and getting to know them, but it quickly becomes just a descent of madness with the action going on in the story. So it just wasn't what I was expecting, and I just didn't really have the best time with it. Another novella, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. This one I did have the best time with, and this one I'm gonna say is an all-time favorite. I think this book was just executed so well. It's definitely super disturbing and not for everyone, but it really worked well for me. Next up is Tender Is the Flesh, and I think it's important that we have an honest moment here, and I let you know that I do not remember this book. I really remember nothing about the events of this book. I remember the vibes I remember being creeped out and disgusted and impressed with it. And I thought it was really great and really brilliant and really well done. And I really recommend it. I still recommend it to this day. But for some reason, I cannot remember what happened in that book. I think it's because it was an audiobook that I listened to all in one day. And those just do not stick with me as well when I read a book like that. So I'm gonna have to reread this one eventually. This doesn't mean I don't love it and I don't think it's a great book. I just genuinely can't remember the events of this book. Next up is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones, and this one I feel comfortable calling an all-time favorite, even though if I read it again, I don't know if I would like it as much. I really love the experience that I have with this novella. It was so fun when I read it the first time. I highly recommend it. I really enjoy the novellas that I read from Stephen Graham Jones, much more than the long standing novels that he does, and that one just stands out in my memory as if someone asks me for a horror novella recommendation, that's one of the first ones that I will think of. Next up is The Fisherman by John Langan, and this one I'm gonna say it delivered. It had the potential to be an all-time favorite, but there's a portion of the book that takes up such a long time that I really did not think needed to take up that much time, and it could have been a favorite, but it just ended up being a good book. Next up is You Should Have Left, and this one is an immediate no. I cannot recommend this book to anyone. Even if I don't like a book most of the time, I can think of a target audience or someone who might enjoy it. This one, no, not worth your time. It's a very small novella and I still don't think it's worth your time. Literally no point to it, would not recommend. Next up is The Upstairs House, and this one is sorry to this book. I do not remember much of you. I remember the first half of the book. The second half of the book got weird and I really don't remember much about it. This is like a Mona Awad style weirdness type book that is about postpartum and this woman thinking that the author of Goodnight Moon is like living in this weird dimension of her house. It's a weird one and I really don't remember much about it. Next up is The Hole, and this one I'm gonna say it delivered. I thought this one did a great job at creating the feeling of horror and the atmosphere of horror, but it wasn't the most exciting book to read. It didn't fully go there the way I wanted it to fully go there. So that one just ends up in that category for me. Next up is Summer Suns, and this one I think is just not for me. To be honest, I haven't seen anyone really love this book. I think maybe Elias of Elias Reads really likes this book, but I haven't seen anyone else really like it. It just wasn't what I was expecting. There's a lot of time with car racing, and I just didn't think that was going to be such a significant portion of the book, but I did not really enjoy that one. Next up is The Last House on Needless Street, and this one I'm gonna say it delivered. I think it was a cool book. I think the twist was cool. I think it was a smart book. A lot of work clearly went into it. It was a fun book to read and try to figure out. I just don't love it. I just don't have a ton of passionate feelings about it. So I'm just gonna put it in it delivered. Next up is The Year of the Witching, and this one was not for me. I wanted a book with spooky witches and spooky dark forests, and it just wasn't really that. It didn't really get as dark as I wanted it to be, so that one just didn't really work for me. Next up is The Dead in the Dark, which is an all-time favorite of mine. I really loved that. It is quirky and fun and cute, but dark, coming of age and sapphic and funny, and just it's good. It's just a good time. I just really liked that one. And What Big Teeth is also an all-time favorite of mine. I really can't wait to reread that book because, to be honest, I don't remember a ton of the specific details of it. Like, I remember the story, the plot, why I liked it, but I think it would feel like a fresh experience to reread it because it's such a weird book that the whole time you're reading it, you don't really know what's fully going on. So I think it'd be fun to do a reread of that one sometime. A House at the Bottom of a Lake. This one is also an all-time favorite of mine. I don't know how these all ended up right together, but this one I think is just a really beautiful story. It's not really horror in the conventional way. I guess it gets called horror because Josh Malerman wrote it and he writes horror. I don't know if I'd really call this book horror. It ended up on this list because that's how it got categorized, but yeah, I really love that book. Next up is The Book of Accidents, and this one I think was a fun time, but it's not necessarily an all-time favorite, so I'm just gonna say it delivered. It's really long. I think it'd be better if it wasn't so long, but it is really cool. It incorporates like sci-fi, alternate dimension type stuff, and I think it does it really well. I really liked that it followed a family. So you have like a teenage perspective, a man perspective, and a female perspective all in this like crazy environment, which I think was a lot of fun. And it was a good time. Next up is Allswell by Mona Awad. And this one, I'm gonna also say it delivered. I thought it was classic Mona Awad weirdness. It was a ton of fun. It's not necessarily a standout favorite of mine, but I did really enjoy reading that one. Next up is The Yellow Wallpaper, and this is a classic short story that I think just delivered. I mean, it's fine. It's a classic for a reason, but reading it now wasn't the most riveting experience. It's also just like a really short story, so it doesn't make that much of an impact, at least not on me. So I think I'm just gonna put it there. The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. This one is an all-time favorite of mine. I really love that one. It came out of nowhere for me this year. I read it for my in-person book club and I didn't think I was gonna like it, but I really love that one. The Haunting of Hill House, I would say not for me, but it's probably more so sorry to this book. Like, this one's just not memorable for me. I didn't really have a great time reading it. I don't really remember a ton about it. I remember the setup and I remember the ending, but everything in between is kind of a blur. I'll just say the show is way better. So just watch the show. The book and the show are nothing alike. Just watch the show. Don't worry about reading the book. It's not that great. And then finally is Dracula, and I think I'm gonna say this is an all-time favorite. I really had a lot of fun with that classic. It really surprised me how enjoyable it was to read. I just worry with classics that I'm gonna be bored or confused, and this one I thought was really accessible and really fun. So all-time favorite. All right, so that is my final tier list, and I honestly ended up with way more on the top 2 tiers than I expected, and really not that many that I didn't have the fondest memories of. Sometimes I feel like it's hard for me to find what I really like in horror because there's so many different types of horror, and horror is really making a resurgence in culture in the past couple of years. So there's just so much going on. It's been hard for me to find my niche and what I love the most in horror, as opposed to thrillers where I feel like I know what kind of thrillers I enjoy and which I'm not going to enjoy. So it's really nice to reflect and actually see that I read a lot of horror books that I actually enjoyed last year. Also, interestingly, is a lot, if not all, of the YA horror that I read last year ended up in my all-time favorite list. So I'm definitely intrigued by that and going to be keeping a closer eye out for YA horror if I end up loving it so much. Which is so funny because YA thrillers, I do not have the same experience with. So that's interesting. Anyway, comment down below and let me know if you have any thoughts on this, if there are any books on my list that you also read and how you would stack rank them, if there are any that you would maybe do differently. Also, like I said, I have done a thriller version of this video, so you can go check out that one. I'll link it down in the description down below as well if you're interested in that. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye!